Now we come to the next sutta, 139, Aranavibhanga Sutta, the exposition of non-conflict. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living at Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anatta Pindika's park. There the Blessed One addressed the monks thus, "Monks, noble sir," they replied. The Blessed One said, "Monks, I shall teach you an exposition of non-conflict. Listen and attend closely to what I shall say." "Yes, noble sir," the monks replied. The Blessed One said, "One should not pursue sensual pleasure, which is low, vulgar, coarse, ignoble, and unbeneficial. And one should not pursue self-mortification, which is painful, ignoble, and unbeneficial. The middle way discovered by the Tathagata avoids both extremes, giving vision, giving knowledge. It leads to peace, to direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to Nibbana. One should know what it is to extol and what it is to disparage. And knowing both, one should neither extol nor disparage, but should teach only the Dhamma. One should know how to define pleasure, and knowing that, one should pursue pleasure within oneself. One should not utter covert speech, and one should not utter overt sharp speech. One should speak unhurriedly, not hurriedly. One should not insist on local language, and one should not override normal usage. This is the summary of the exposition of non-conflict." I'll stop here for a moment. So here the Buddha says, these few things amounts to non-conflict. So here the Buddha says, don't pursue sensual pleasure, or the opposite, self-mortification. Instead, practice the middle way taught by the Buddha. And also the Buddha says that in teaching the Dhamma, one should not praise some people or disparage, talk bad about other people. And then one should know pleasure, and one should pursue pleasure within oneself. Later you find there are two types of pleasure. One is pleasure from external things, and the second type of pleasure is from internal. So the Buddha says that we should pursue the pleasure within oneself. Then one should not utter covert speech, secret speech, disguised speech. And one should not utter sharp speech openly. In public, you criticize somebody, you hurt somebody. And then also in speaking the Dhamma, one should speak unhurriedly, not hurriedly. And then lastly, concerning language, one should use normal language. Okay, one should not pursue sensual pleasure, which is low, vulgar, coarse, ignoble, and unbeneficial. And one should not pursue self-mortification, which is painful, ignoble, and unbeneficial. So it was said. And with reference to what was this said, the pursuit of the enjoyment of one whose pleasure is linked to sensual desires, low, vulgar, coarse, ignoble, and unbeneficial, is a state beset by suffering, vexation, despair, and fever, and it is the wrong way. Disengagement from the pursuit of the enjoyment of one whose pleasure is linked to sensual desires, low, vulgar, coarse, ignoble, and unbeneficial, is a state without suffering, vexation, despair, and fever, and it is the right way. The pursuit of self-mortification, painful, ignoble, and unbeneficial, is a state beset by suffering, vexation, despair, and fever, and it is the wrong way. Disengagement from the pursuit of self-mortification, painful, ignoble, and unbeneficial, is a state without suffering, vexation, despair, and fever, and it is the right way. So it was with reference to this that it was said, one should not pursue sensual pleasure, which is low, vulgar, coarse, ignoble, and unbeneficial, and one should not pursue self-mortification, which is painful, ignoble, and unbeneficial. The middle way discovered by the Tathagata avoids both these extremes, giving vision, giving knowledge. It leads to peace, to direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to nibbana. So it was said. And with reference to what was this said, it is just this noble eightfold path, that is, right view, right thoughts, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right recollection, and right concentration. So it was with reference to this that it was said, the middle way discovered by the Tathagata avoids both these extremes and leads to Nibbana. I'll stop here for a moment. So here the Buddha said that in the spiritual path, one should not pursue sensual pleasure. Sensual pleasure is pleasure regarding the five chords of sensual pleasure, taking delight, enjoy the enjoyment, the gratification of forms, sounds, smells, tastes, and touch, and this is the enjoyment of worldly people. But even some ascetics, they also indulge in sensual pleasure, like some of the external ascetics during the Buddha's time. And the Buddha says this is low, vulgar, coarse, ignoble, and unbeneficial. And then the opposite is self-mortification. Many ascetics during the Buddha's time, they practice self-mortification. They just torture their body, and they think that is the path to enlightenment. For example, they go naked, and because they go naked all the time, at night they will shiver because of the cold, and during the day they are burned by the sun, or some of them they practice starving themselves, eating very little, or some people they put up their arm and never put down their arm. Year after year they lift up their arm. All this is unbeneficial. So the Buddha says to practice the middle way, or the middle path. And the middle path of the Buddha is the noble eightfold path. It is not the middle path in the worldly sense. In the Buddha's teachings, the middle way is the noble eightfold path, consisting of these 8 factors just mentioned. One should know what it is to extol and what it is to disparage, and knowing both, one should neither extol nor disparage, but should teach only the Dhamma. So it was said. And with reference to what was this said, here monks, how monks does there come to be extolling and disparaging, and failure to teach only the Dhamma? When one says, all those engaged in the pursuit of the enjoyment of one whose pleasure is linked to sensual desires, low, vulgar, etc., and unbeneficial, are beset by suffering, vexation, despair, and fever, and they have entered upon the wrong way. One thus disparages some. When one says, all those disengaged from the pursuit of the enjoyment of one whose pleasure is linked to sensual desires, low, vulgar, etc., are without suffering, vexation, despair, and fever, and they have entered upon the right way. One thus extols some. When one says, all those engaged in the pursuit of self-mortification, painful, ignoble, and unbeneficial, are beset by suffering, vexation, despair, and fever, and they have entered upon the wrong way. One thus disparages some. When one says, all those disengaged from the pursuit of self-mortification, painful, ignoble, and unbeneficial, are without suffering, vexation, despair, and fever, and they have entered upon the right way. One thus extols some. When one says, all those who have not abandoned the fetter of being are beset by suffering, vexation, despair, and fever, and they have entered upon the wrong way. One thus disparages some. When one says, all those who have abandoned the fetter of being are without suffering, vexation, despair, and fever, and they have entered upon the right way, one thus extols some. That is how there comes to be extolling and disparaging, and failure to teach only the Dhamma. And how monks does there come to be neither extolling nor disparaging, but teaching only the Dhamma? Then one does not say, all those engaged in the pursuit of the enjoyment of one whose pleasure is linked to sensual desires have entered upon the wrong way, but says instead, the pursuit is a state beset by suffering, vexation, despair, and fever, and it is the wrong way, then one teaches only the Dhamma. When one does not say, all those disengaged from the pursuit of the enjoyment of one whose pleasure is linked to sensual desires have entered upon the right way, but says instead that disengagement is a state without suffering, vexation, despair and fever, and it is the right way, then one teaches only the Dhamma. When one does not say, all those engaged in the pursuit of self-mortification have entered upon the wrong way, but says instead, the pursuit is a state beset by suffering, vexation, despair and fever, and it is the wrong way, then one teaches only the Dhamma. When one does not say, all those disengaged from the pursuit of self-mortification have entered upon the right way, but says instead, the disengagement is a state without suffering, vexation, despair and fever, and it is the right way, then one teaches only the Dhamma. When one does not say, all those who have not abandoned the fetter of being have entered upon the wrong way, but says instead, as long as the fetter of being is unabandoned, being too is unabandoned, then one teaches only the Dhamma. When one does not say, all those who have abandoned the fetter of being have entered upon the right way, but says instead, when the fetter of being is abandoned, being also is abandoned, then one teaches only the Dhamma. So it was with reference to this that it was said, one should know what it is to extol and what it is to disparage, and knowing both, one should neither extol nor disparage, but should teach only the Dhamma. Let's stop here for a moment. So here the Buddha is saying we should teach the Dhamma. So here the Buddha says we just teach the Dhamma without saying if you do this then those people who follow this wrong path they are practicing wrongly and they will suffer for it and all that. The Buddha says just to say that this is the wrong path and if anyone who so this is quite clear from here what the sutta says, but unfortunately it's very difficult to do this. And if you look into the Buddha's suttas, sometimes the Buddha also says very bluntly that certain teacher is wrong. For example, there's one sutta where the Buddha scolds Makali Gosala Putta. He says Makali Gosala Putta is a fool, just like a fish trap leads all the fish into a net and they cannot come out from it. So in the same way, the Buddha said that Makali Gosala Putta is leading all beings because this Makali Gosala Putta says there's no such thing as Karma Vipaka. So the Buddha says he's leading all his followers into the realms of the woeful realms of rebirth. So it's not easy just to teach the Dhamma without saying without being a bit personal. But anyway, those who sometimes, but then of course it's best not to mention any names when the Dhamma is taught, not to be personal. You can say this is right, this is wrong, or those who practice this is practicing the right path, those who are practicing that is practicing the wrong path. That is although that contradicts what is said here, but it's not so bad as to get personal and mention names. So teaching the Dhamma, we should never mention names if possible. One should know how to define pleasure, and knowing that one should pursue pleasure within oneself. So it was said, and with reference to what was this said? Monks, there are these 5 chords of sensual pleasure. What 5? Forms cognizable by the eye, sounds, odors, flavors, tangibles, cognizable by the body that are wished for, desired, agreeable and likable, connected with sensual desire and provocative of lust. These are the 5 chords of sensual pleasure. Now the pleasure and joy that arise dependent on these 5 chords of sensual pleasure are called sensual pleasure, a filthy pleasure, a coarse pleasure, an ignoble pleasure, I say of this kind of pleasure that it should not be pursued, that it should not be developed, that it should not be cultivated, and that it should be feared. Here monks, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, a monk enters upon and abides in the first jhana, the second jhana, third jhana, fourth jhana. This is called the bliss of renunciation, the bliss of seclusion, the bliss of peace, the bliss of enlightenment. I say of this kind of pleasure that it should be pursued, that it should be developed, that it should be cultivated, and that it should not be feared. So it was with reference to this that it was said, one should know how to define pleasure, and knowing that one should pursue pleasure within oneself. I'll stop here for a moment. So, in the previous sutta, we read that when you attain the jhanas, you should not cling to it. But here, the Buddha says that this last part, one should pursue pleasure within oneself. This pleasure within oneself is this pleasure that is derived from the jhanas, which the Buddha calls the bliss of renunciation, the bliss of seclusion, the bliss of peace, the bliss of enlightenment. Why? Because in some other sutta, the Buddha says these four jhanas can bring you to attain, help you to attain the four Aryan fruits. Sotapanna, first fruit, Sakadagamin, the second fruit, Anagamin, the third fruit, and Arahanthood, the fourth fruit. So the Buddha here is encouraging the monks to indulge in the bliss of jhana, but then also the Buddha has said in some other sutta not to stay there, but having attained them, to surmount them one by one until you have attained the final goal of the holy life, which is the liberation or destruction of the asavas. But then we see from the suttas that even after the arahants have finished their work, that they constantly abide in the jhanas. It's blameless because they have finished their work. One should not utter covered speech, and one should not utter overt, sharp speech. So it was said. And with reference to what was this said? Here, monks, when one knows covered speech to be untrue, incorrect, and unbeneficial, one should on no account utter it. When one knows covered speech to be true, correct, and unbeneficial, one should try not to utter it. But when one knows covered speech to be true, correct, and beneficial, one may utter it, knowing the time to do so. Here, monks, when one knows overt, sharp speech to be untrue, incorrect, and unbeneficial, one should on no account utter it. When one knows overt, sharp speech to be true, correct, and unbeneficial, one should try not to utter it. But when one knows overt, sharp speech to be true, correct, and beneficial, one may utter it, knowing the time to do so. So it was with reference to this that it was said, one should not utter covered speech, and one should not utter overt, sharp speech. This covered speech is this, as I mentioned, is secret speech, disguised speech, and overt speech is to speak openly. So here the Buddha says concerning this covered speech, if it is true it is and correct and beneficial, then you may utter it, but know the time to do so. And similarly for overt, sharp speech. So, for example, somebody is following the wrong Dhamma, following the wrong teacher, following a teacher that is teaching wrong Dhamma. So, if you want to help him, then you can speak to him secretly. This is covert speech, which is true, correct, and beneficial. So you don't, when you want to say something true about another teacher who is not teaching correctly. You don't say in the open. You say in the open, it becomes a big issue, antagonize a lot of people. But then depending, because if you are not personal, then it's okay. But if it's something personal, then it's best not to speak in public. So the Buddha says, if it is beneficial for that person, as I mentioned, somebody is following a wrong teacher, is wasting his time, and he's learning the wrong things. For example, he follows this Makali Gosala Buddha, who is teaching that there is no Karma Vipaka. And you want to help him not land up in the woeful plane of rebirth, then you tell him secretly that this is not correct, and it's okay, but it's beneficial. On the other hand, overt, sharp speech is true and beneficial. In other words, in public, if you say something that is true and is beneficial for people, then it's all right to do so. For example, in the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha says, if a monk knows that somebody teaches a Dhamma and says that is Dhamma, then the Buddha says, knowing it, we should speak out even in public against this adhamma which is taught in the name of the Buddha's teachings. So the Buddha encourages us to be forthright when it comes to helping people. Is true and is beneficial. It's all right to speak openly, sharp speech, but also we only talk about Dhamma. We try not to get personal. One should speak unhurriedly, not hurriedly, so it was said, and with reference to what was this said. Here monks, when one speaks hurriedly, one's body grows tired, and one's mind becomes excited, one's voice is strained, and one's throat becomes hoarse, and the speech of one who speaks hurriedly is indistinct and hard to understand. Here monks, when one speaks unhurriedly, one's body does not grow tired, nor does one's mind become excited. One's voice is not strained, nor does one's throat become hoarse, and the speech of one who speaks unhurriedly is distinct and easy to understand. So it was with reference to this that it was said, one should speak unhurriedly, not hurriedly. Stop here for a moment. So here, especially when Dhamma is being taught, it's not easy to understand. So if one speaks too fast, people cannot follow. Then it's hard to understand. In fact, we see from the suttas very often when the Buddha teaches, he repeats what he says sometimes a few times, just to make it sink into the listener's mind. So this is nothing. One should not insist on local language, and one should not override normal usage. So it was said. And with reference to what was this said? How, monks, does there come to be insistence on local language and overriding of normal usage? Here monks, in different localities, they call the same thing a dish, by pati, or a bowl, pata, or a vessel, vita, or a saucer, sirava, or a pan, daropa, or a pot, pona, or a mug, hana, or a basin, pisila. So whatever they call it in such and such a locality, one speaks accordingly, firmly adhering to that expression and insisting only this is correct, anything else is wrong. This is how there comes to be insistence on local language and overriding normal usage. And how, monks, does there come to be non-insistence on local language and non-overriding of normal usage? Here monks, in different localities, they call the same thing a dish, or a bowl, or a vessel, etc. So whatever they call it in such and such a locality, without adhering to that expression, one speaks accordingly, thinking, these venerable ones, it seems, are speaking with reference to this. This is how there comes to be non-insistence on local language and non-overriding of normal usage. So it was with reference to this that it was said, one should not insist on local language and one should not override normal usage. So basically what the Buddha is trying to say here, I think, is that we should use the language where people can understand, not to insist on certain expressions. if we expand this a bit now, that is not only particular things, but the language itself. In the Dhammapada, verse 102, Buddha said, one sentence of the doctrine which brings happiness to a person who understands is better than 100 stanzas consisting of meaningless words. So whatever we say must be understood. Otherwise, it is meaningless words. So, for example, if we teach these suttas that we are reading now in Pali, people won't understand. If we insist on using Pali and we just chant the whole sutta in Pali, you can listen to me, but you won't understand what I'm saying, right? So it is important to use the language where people can understand. So if we chant we do chanting of paritas and all that, it's also important to know what you are chanting. If you are chanting the Pali chants and you don't know the meaning, then it's waste of time. It's important to know the meaning. So in a way, that shows that if you chant the Pali chants in the language that you are familiar with, it's also okay. If you want to chant it in English, you want to chant it in whatever language you understand, it's okay. The important thing is to understand it. Here, monks, the pursuit of the enjoyment of one whose pleasure is linked to sensual desires, low, vulgar, etc., is a state beset by suffering, vexation, despair, and fever, and it is the wrong way. Therefore, this is a state with conflict. Here, monks, disengagement from the pursuit of the enjoyment of one whose pleasure is linked to sensual desires, low, vulgar, and beneficial, is a state without suffering, vexation, despair, and fever, and it is the right way. Therefore, this is a state without conflict. Here, monks, the pursuit of self-mortification, painful, ignoble, and unbeneficial, is a state beset by suffering, vexation, despair, and fever, and it is the wrong way. Therefore, this is a state with conflict. Here, monks, disengagement from the pursuit of self-mortification, painful, ignoble, and unbeneficial, is a state without suffering, vexation, despair, and fever, and it is the right way. Therefore, this is a state without conflict. Here, monks, the middle way discovered by the Tathagata avoids both these extremes, giving vision, giving knowledge. It leads to peace, direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to Nibbana. It is a state without suffering, and it is the right way. Therefore, this is a state without conflict. Here, monks, extolling and disparaging and failure to teach only the Dhamma is a state beset by suffering, and it is the wrong way. Therefore, this is a state with conflict. Here, monks, not extolling and not disparaging and teaching only the Dhamma is a state without suffering, and it is the right way. Therefore, this is a state without conflict. Here, monks, sensual pleasure, a filthy pleasure, a coarse pleasure, an ignoble pleasure is a state beset by suffering, and it is the wrong way. Therefore, this is a state with conflict. Here, monks, the bliss of renunciation, the bliss of seclusion, the bliss of peace, the bliss of enlightenment is a state without suffering, and it is the right way. Therefore, this is a state of without conflict. Here, monks, covered speech that is untrue, incorrect, and unbeneficial is a state beset by suffering. Therefore, this is a state with conflict. Here, monks, covered speech that is true, correct, and unbeneficial is a state beset by suffering. Therefore, this is a state with conflict. Here, monks, covered speech that is true, correct, and beneficial is a state without suffering. Therefore, this is a state without conflict. Here, monks, overt, sharp speech that is untrue, incorrect, and unbeneficial is a state beset by suffering. Therefore, this is a state with conflict. Here, monks, overt, sharp speech that is true, correct, and unbeneficial is a state beset by suffering. Therefore, this is a state with conflict. Here, monks, overt, sharp speech that is true, correct, and beneficial is a state without suffering. Therefore, this is a state without conflict. Here, monks, the speech of one who speaks hurriedly is a state beset by suffering, vexation, despair and fever, and it is the wrong way. Therefore, this is a state with conflict. Here, monks, the speech of one who speaks unhurriedly is a state without suffering. Therefore, this is a state without conflict. Here, monks, insistence on local language and overriding of normal usage is a state beset by suffering. Therefore, this is a state with conflict. Here, monks, non-insistence on local language and non-overriding of normal usage is a state without suffering, vexation, despair and fever, and it is the right way. Therefore, this is a state without conflict. Therefore, monks, you should train yourselves thus. We shall know the state with conflict, and we shall know the state without conflict, and knowing these, we shall enter upon the way without conflict. Now, monks, Subhuti is a clansman who has entered upon the way without conflict. That is what the Blessed One said. The monks were satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. That's the end of the sutta. So this last part, the Buddha mentioned this Subhuti. This name is often heard in Mahayana Sutras. If you look at the note 1263, let me see. Subhuti, 1263. Venerable Subhuti was the younger brother of Anathapindika and became a monk on the day Jeta's grove was offered to the Sangha. The Buddha appointed him the foremost disciple in two categories, those who live without conflict and those who are worthy of gifts. Now, so here at the last part, the Buddha says, those states without conflict, there are a few. The first one is disengagement from the pursuit of sensual pleasures. This is a state without conflict. Then the second one is disengagement from the pursuit of self-mortification. Then the third one is the middle way taught by the Buddha. The fourth one is not extolling and not disparaging, teaching only the Dhamma is a state without conflict. And then another one is the bliss of renunciation, the bliss of seclusion, the bliss of peace, the bliss of enlightenment, which is basically the bliss of jhana. That is a state without conflict. And then covered speech that is true, correct and beneficial. That means speech in secret or disguise that is true and beneficial is a state without conflict. And then overt, sharp speech, if it is true and beneficial, is also a state without conflict. And then speaking unhurriedly, especially in teaching the Dhamma, is a state without conflict. And then the last one, non-insistence on local language and non-overriding of normal usage is a state without conflict. So we have gone through the explanation of all the various states of conflict mentioned in this sutta. Okay, anything to discuss? Sometimes you have to see whether the other party considers it beneficial or not. If the other party considers it beneficial and appreciate what you say, then it's okay to say it. If you say something which you think is beneficial, but the other party does not accept it as beneficial, there is no point to speak. Dhamma and Adhamma. Saddhamma is true Dhamma. True Dhamma. Okay, and true Dhamma refers to the original suttas of the Buddha, because there is one sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya. The Buddha says, if any monk says that the Buddha taught such and such, then the Buddha said you should not accept it and you should not reject it. You should compare it with the suttas, meaning the original suttas of the Buddha. If it agrees with the original suttas, then you can accept it to the Buddha's words. So you can see from there that Saddhamma, true Dhamma, refers to the original suttas. Adhamma is what is contradictory to the original suttas. And you will find that later books, there is usually this contradiction. For example, the Mahayana Sutras, or the Abhidhamma, or the commentaries. Although they have some Dhamma inside all of them, but it is mixed with Adhamma. And unless you are very familiar with the suttas, the original Dhamma or the Saddhamma, then you will not know the contradiction. That's why you have to be very familiar with the Buddha's original words in the suttas, and then only when you read other books, later books, then you can find, you can notice the contradiction. Okay, shall we end here?